Chapter 11. Ambush. As Urkai looked over the surrounding land from his position in the central tower of the royal palace of Ursus, he did not like what he saw. The return of Tamark and the men he brought with him greatly changed the complexion of the conflict. Doubt began to linger in the villainous ruler's mind. However, he disguised his fears with bold talk. "So the rebels have rounded up a few more sympathizers," he sneered. "Nearly 1,000 men, sire," one of the evil king's generals noted. "All farmers and miners, no doubt," the slovenly monarch scoffed. "They are of little threat to us." "Their numbers are not insignificant," the general pointed out. "There could be tens of thousands of them for all I care." Urkai roared. "They have no skill in battle. Our army will destroy them. Besides, once they find out that their leader is dead, they will lose heart and turn away." "I think it is the threat of losing their leader that drives them on," the general argued. "Killing the princess will only make her a martyr and enrage the people further." "Are you suggesting that I let Sarah live?" Urkai gasped. "I am just saying that threatening to kill her is only adding to the problem," the general explained, refusing to back away from his opinion. The king's advisors cast knowing glances at one another as they braced themselves for the tirade that inevitably followed such criticism of the king. "I think the problem is the inept military commanders who allowed this minuscule uprising to escalate to the point that it has." Urkai ranted as his jowls flushed bright red with anger. "Perhaps I should execute you along with the rebellious wench and save myself any further disgrace." The room fell silent. Tension filled the air as the two men stared at each other with fiery eyes. Urkai could ill afford any conflict within his army at such a critical time, yet he did not want it to appear as though the general had gotten the better of him. "Remember who it is that allows you to live like royalty," the king warned. "If the rebels prevail, the first thing they will do is take away your wealth. No, the first thing they will do is kill you," the general coolly countered. The military leader's words hit home. There was no denying the fate that awaited the hated king should the rebels win. Urkai glanced anxiously out the window, as if to change the subject. "Where is the Eastern army?" he muttered. "They should have been here by now." Little did Urkai know the fate that was befalling his soldiers in the woods outside of Norfolk, even as he spoke. Aldred and his archers had been positioned in the trees near the western road for days, patiently waiting for any sign of the Ursel army. It was a tedious and boring job standing vigil over the Ursel thoroughfare. As Ectheon was struggling with plans of war outside the gates of Ursus, Arlon and Dialus were battling restlessness and thoughts of envy over the more exciting assignments their fellow knights had been given. "When this is all over, and we return home, what stories will we have to tell?" Dialus said to Arlon. "Diaxes and the others will have breathtaking tales of epic battles and the taking of Ursel strongholds. What will we have to boast about? While Diaxes is marching all over Ursulus, I am sitting in a tree not 5 miles away from Norfolk, guarding the road. Now there is a story people will remember for a while. I am sure Commander Diaxes has good reasons for putting us here," Arlon said. "If the Ursel army retreats, like he says it will undoubtedly see more than our share of combat." Dialus's desire for excitement was soon quenched as a trio of horsemen charged down the road, heading towards Norfolk. The elven sharpshooters drew back their bows and took aim as the riders came into view. "Hold your fire," Aldred whispered. "Those are messengers. We want them to make it to the city, so the Ursel army will receive the orders to retreat." The archers relaxed their weapons and watched as the horsemen stormed by, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. "They are in quite a hurry," Arlon observed. "Diaxes and the others must be doing well." "It is up to us to make sure it stays that way," Aldred said. "We must be ready when the army comes. The more damage we can do, the better it will be for our friends in Ursulus." The elves intensified their vigil, knowing that at any time the Ursel army could begin its march back into Ursulus. Dialus watched on through the night, ready to unleash the ammunition he carried on his back at any moment. But the night was long, longer than the elf's stamina. Before he knew it, he was sound asleep, nestled between the boughs of a mighty oak. Morning came, and along with it the sound of marching feet and the rumbling of wagons filled with supplies. The army was on the move. The clamoring steps of the massive brigade abruptly roused Dialis from his dreamy state. He rubbed his eyes and peered through the leaves to catch a glimpse of the Ursal forces. From his vantage point, he could see the soldiers marching in formation, escorted by officers on horseback. The supply wagons were spaced in between divisions of foot soldiers. It was an impressive display of force indeed. One could only wonder how the Teluvians managed to hold off such an army for so long, if indeed they had. No news of victory or defeat had reached the Elven army. As the Ursals neared the hiding place of the elves, Ardred whistled to signal the alert. All the archers readied their bows, taking aim at the unsuspecting soldiers. As the convoy came directly under the snipers' positions, the Alcadian commander let out a second whistle to signal the attack. Arrows whizzed through the trees from both sides of the road as the elves unleashed their deadly arsenal. The feathery shafts struck their targets with great accuracy, felling 50 men at once. As the soldiers scurried in fear and confusion, the archers released a second and then a third wave of arrows with similar results. The Ursal army was in utter chaos. Some of the horsemen charged ahead, attempting to make a break for it. Few made it past the trees without receiving an arrow in the back. The foot soldiers fled in different directions. Some headed back toward Norfolk, while others sought shelter among the trees. Those who ventured beneath the oaks were only in for more trouble, as the shrewd marksmen picked them off one by one. There seemed to be nowhere to hide. As Dialis attempted to reposition himself on the tree branch to get a better shot, he lost his footing and then his balance. The next thing he knew, he was crashing through the lower branches on his way to the soft, mossy ground below. The disoriented elf landed with a thud. Several cuts and bruises covered his aching, motionless body. Dialis lay there for a moment, attempting to gather his wits about him. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see someone coming. Turning his head, he saw two Ursal soldiers with drawn swords. The once battle-hungry elf would have gladly traded this moment of excitement he had been so vocally yearning for in exchange for the calm and safety of the upper regions of the trees. Dialis frantically struggled to get to his feet. Upon standing, he was immediately taken by a dizzy spell. The forest spun around his throbbing head at a rapid pace. Staggering, Dialis attempted to draw his sword, but to no avail. Unable to keep his balance, he fell to the ground once again. All the while, the Ursals were closing in, eager to slay the fallen archer. Dialis, sensing his imminent doom, groped desperately in the leaves beside him in search of his bow. His outstretched fingers finally found what he was seeking. He quickly drew a shaft from his quiver and took aim. However, his vision was blurred and his aim betrayed him. The arrow whizzed by the rapidly approaching soldiers and struck a tree several paces away. But the tragic fate of Dialis had not gone unnoticed. Arlen became aware of his friend's peril as he looked down from the branches above. He reached back into his quiver to draw an arrow. However, instead of finding a feathery shaft, his hand encountered only empty space. In the fast-paced battle, Arlan had quickly gone through all his ammunition. He gave a worried glance back at his endangered friend. The Ursal soldiers were no more than 10 paces away from the injured knight. There was no time to think. Aiming his body, Arlan dove down from the branches above. With a tremendous racket, the elf fell on top of one of the unsuspecting soldiers. The sudden noise drew the attention of the other Ursal. As Arlan struggled on the ground with the downed soldier, Dialis took aim again. This time, his aim was better, though far from perfect. The arrow found its mark in the thigh of the standing soldier. Overcome by a sudden burst of pain, the Ursal warrior dropped his sword and fell to the ground, grasping the burning wound. Arlan prevailed in his struggle with the first soldier and quickly put the second out of his misery, much to the relief of Dialis, who still looked very helpless as he lay in the leaves. Arlan rushed over to check the condition of his fallen comrade. "Are you all right?" Arlan asked, very much concerned over the health of his friend. "I will live. I do not know how long, though, if I keep pulling stunts like this," Dialis said, mocking his own blunder. "And you were afraid you were not going to see any action," Arlan chided his friend. Perhaps I was a bit overzealous in my remarks, Dialis said with a sheepish grin. That experience was a little too close for my liking. Most of the Ursals had given up the fight and retreated to Norfolk, leaving their supply wagons behind. There were still some minor clashes, as a few soldiers were still roaming the woods near the road. But this was of little consequence to the elves. Their ambush had been a success. Over half of the Ursal brigade had been destroyed. The rest had been turned back to Norfolk. The Ursals would now be forced to regroup and withdraw all their remaining forces from Teluvia if they were to attempt to break through and answer their king's call for reinforcements. Indeed, the evil king had never envisioned such an occurrence. He always assumed he could call back at least a part of his mighty eastern army at his discretion, without any worries. If he had known the truth, he would not have talked so boldly to the rebels. It appeared as though things were taking a turn for the worse for the despotic leader, as the forces poised against him mounted while the reinforcements he had been counting on were hopelessly cut off. Or were they? As Urkai looked out from his tower, he saw not an army coming across the plains from the east, but rather he witnessed the full force of his Ivansport brigade marching up from the south. The sight of his standard flying before the mighty army gave him instant reassurance, quenching any fears of a successful rebellion. Ah, the army has returned triumphantly from Ivansport, the tyrant observed. The rebellion there has been crushed, as this one soon will be. Let us see that sorry band of peasants deal with this. They do not stand a chance against my forces. Within hours, they will be face down in the fields, their blood staining the grass. That is, if they stay and fight. No doubt most of them will come to their senses and flee when they see the true magnitude of the power they are up against. Just to make the rout complete, I will send the soldiers out from the city. No sense letting the boys from Ivansport have all the fun.